The early morning sun peeked through the large windows of Mel's Café, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Staff Sergeant James Cooper sat alone in his favorite corner booth, his calloused hands wrapped around a steaming cup of black coffee. It was 6:30 a.m., and the small-town diner was just beginning to wake up for another day. Cooper had discovered Mel's Café 3 days ago, shortly after returning from his fourth tour in Afghanistan. The place reminded him of the small diner where his grandfather used to take him for breakfast when he was just a kid. The familiar smell of bacon, eggs, and fresh coffee brought back memories of simpler times, before he had seen the things that now kept him awake at night. At 34 years old, Cooper's face told stories that his quiet demeanor kept hidden. Small scars dotted his tanned skin, and fine lines around his eyes spoke of long days spent squinting under the harsh desert sun. Despite his military background, he chose to blend in, wearing a simple dark blue t-shirt and well-worn jeans. The only hint of his service was the military-style boots he couldn't bring himself to stop wearing. They were just too comfortable after all these years. Sally, the 60-year-old waitress with kind eyes and silver hair, approached his table with a coffee pot in hand. "Refill, honey?" she asked, already knowing his answer. Cooper nodded with a small smile, watching as she topped off his cup with practiced precision. She reminded him of his mother, always taking care of others, never asking for anything in return. "You're becoming quite the regular," Sally said warmly, adjusting her name tag that had seen better days. "It's nice to see a young man who knows how to appreciate a quiet breakfast." Cooper looked up at her, his green eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. "Yes, ma'am. Best coffee in Burlington." His voice was soft but clear, carrying the kind of authority that came from years of giving orders in life-or-death situations. The morning regulars started filtering in one by one. First came Old Joe, the retired postman who had delivered mail in Burlington for over 40 years. He tipped his worn baseball cap at Cooper before settling into his usual spot at the counter. Then came the Peterson sisters, both teachers at the local elementary school, chatting quietly about their upcoming classes. Through the windows, Cooper could see the town coming to life. The small grocery store across the street was raising its security shutters, and the flower shop owner was arranging fresh bouquets outside her door. It was peaceful, exactly what he had been looking for after years of chaos and gunfire. As he sipped his coffee, Cooper's trained eyes automatically scanned each person who entered the cafe. It wasn't paranoia, just habit, one that had kept him and his men alive during countless missions. He noticed everything: the way people carried themselves, where their hands were, how they positioned themselves in the room. Some habits were hard to break, and after 15 years in the service, situational awareness was as natural as breathing. The local news played quietly on the small TV mounted in the corner. Cooper half listened to stories about community events and weather forecasts. Such a change from the war reports and security briefings he was used to. A young mother struggled to open the cafe door while managing a stroller, and Cooper instinctively started to rise to help. But Sally was already there, holding the door with a grandmother's smile. The morning sun grew stronger, making the chrome fixtures on the tables shine. Cooper checked his watch, 7:15 a.m. In his previous life, he would have already completed a morning patrol by now, but today his only mission was to enjoy his breakfast in peace. His scrambled eggs and toast arrived, delivered by Sally with a motherly "Eat up, dear. You're too skinny." For the first time in years, Cooper felt something close to contentment. The familiar routine of civilian life was slowly beginning to feel normal again. The weight of his combat knife, hidden in his boot, and the memories of war seemed a little lighter in this peaceful corner of Mel's Café, where the biggest decision he had to make was whether to order another cup of coffee. Little did he know that this quiet morning was about to take an unexpected turn. The early morning sun peeked through the large windows of Mel's Café, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Staff Sergeant James Cooper sat alone in his favorite corner booth, his calloused hands wrapped around a steaming cup of black coffee. It was 6:30 a.m., and the small-town diner was just beginning to wake up for another day. Cooper had discovered Mel's Café 3 days ago, shortly after returning from his fourth tour in Afghanistan. The place reminded him of the small diner where his grandfather used to take him for breakfast when he was just a kid. The familiar smell of bacon, eggs, and fresh coffee brought back memories of simpler times, before he had seen the things that now kept him awake at night. At 34 years old, Cooper's face told stories that his quiet demeanor kept hidden. Small scars dotted his tanned skin, and fine lines around his eyes spoke of long days spent squinting under the harsh desert sun. Despite his military background, he chose to blend in, wearing a simple dark blue t-shirt and well-worn jeans. The only hint of his service was the military-style boots he couldn't bring himself to stop wearing. They were just too comfortable after all these years. Sally, the 60-year-old waitress with kind eyes and silver hair, approached his table with a coffee pot in hand. "Refill, honey?" she asked, already knowing his answer. Cooper nodded with a small smile, watching as she topped off his cup with practiced precision. She reminded him of his mother, always taking care of others, never asking for anything in return. "You're becoming quite the regular," Sally said warmly, adjusting her name tag that had seen better days. "It's nice to see a young man who knows how to appreciate a quiet breakfast." Cooper looked up at her, his green eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. "Yes, ma'am. Best coffee in Burlington." His voice was soft but clear, carrying the kind of authority that came from years of giving orders in life-or-death situations. The morning regulars started filtering in one by one. First came Old Joe, the retired postman who had delivered mail in Burlington for over 40 years. He tipped his worn baseball cap at Cooper before settling into his usual spot at the counter. Then came the Peterson sisters, both teachers at the local elementary school, chatting quietly about their upcoming classes. Through the windows, Cooper could see the town coming to life. The small grocery store across the street was raising its security shutters, and the flower shop owner was arranging fresh bouquets outside her door. It was peaceful, exactly what he had been looking for after years of chaos and gunfire. As he sipped his coffee, Cooper's trained eyes automatically scanned each person who entered the cafe. It wasn't paranoia, just habit, one that had kept him and his men alive during countless missions. He noticed everything: the way people carried themselves, where their hands were, how they positioned themselves in the room. Some habits were hard to break, and after 15 years in the service, situational awareness was as natural as breathing. The local news played quietly on the small TV mounted in the corner. Cooper half listened to stories about community events and weather forecasts. Such a change from the war reports and security briefings he was used to. A young mother struggled to open the cafe door while managing a stroller, and Cooper instinctively started to rise to help. But Sally was already there, holding the door with a grandmother's smile. The morning sun grew stronger, making the chrome fixtures on the tables shine. Cooper checked his watch, 7:15 a.m. In his previous life, he would have already completed a morning patrol by now, but today his only mission was to enjoy his breakfast in peace. His scrambled eggs and toast arrived, delivered by Sally with a motherly "Eat up, dear. You're too skinny." For the first time in years, Cooper felt something close to contentment. The familiar routine of civilian life was slowly beginning to feel normal again. The weight of his combat knife, hidden in his boot, and the memories of war seemed a little lighter in this peaceful corner of Mel's Café, where the biggest decision he had to make was whether to order another cup of coffee. Little did he know that this quiet morning was about to take an unexpected turn. The peaceful atmosphere of Mel's Café shattered like glass when the first motorcycle roared into the parking lot. The deep rumble of heavy engines made the coffee cups rattle on their saucers, and Old Joe's newspaper crinkled as his hands tightened around its edges. Two more motorcycles followed, their combined noise drowning out the quiet music playing from the cafe's old radio. Through the large windows, Cooper watched as three men dismounted their bikes. The machines were expensive Harley-Davidsons, customized with chrome accessories and painted in menacing black and red colors. The leader, a massive man standing well over 6 feet tall, took off his helmet to reveal a shaved head covered in tribal tattoos that crawled up from his neck. "That's Roman Matthews," Sally whispered to Cooper as she passed by his table, her voice tight with worry. "Everyone calls him Tank. Those Road Reapers have been nothing but trouble since they set up their clubhouse outside town 6 months ago." Cooper nodded slightly, his military training automatically kicking in as he assessed the situation. Tank wore a leather vest covered in patches, some indicating motorcycle club membership, others hinting at a violent past. His two companions were smaller but looked no less dangerous, one wearing a bandana and sporting a long beard, the other clean-shaven with arms covered in sleeve tattoos. The bell above the cafe door jingled as Tank pushed it open with unnecessary force. The sound made several customers jump, and the Peterson sisters quickly gathered their belongings, leaving money on their table as they hurried toward the side exit. The three bikers spread out as they entered, an unconscious tactical movement that Cooper recognized from his combat experience. Well, what do we have here? Tank's voice boomed through the cafe. He stood in the center of the room, hands on his hips, taking up as much space as possible. Looks like everyone's enjoying their breakfast. His tone suggested he meant to change that. The bearded man, who had a patch reading wrench on his vest, knocked over a salt shaker as he passed a table. He made no move to pick it up, instead grinning at the elderly couple who quickly averted their eyes. The third biker, with shark stitched on his vest, positioned himself near the main entrance, effectively blocking the primary exit. Sally emerged from behind the counter, trying to maintain her professional demeanor. "Good morning, gentlemen. Would you like to see some menace?" Her voice trembled slightly, but she stood her ground. Tank turned his attention to her, his lips curling into an unpleasant smile. "Sure thing, sweetheart. And make sure you bring us some of that fresh coffee. We'll be needing the whole pot." He sprawled into a booth, his heavy boots scraping across the floor. The morning regulars began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Old Joe buried his face deeper in his newspaper, though his white-knuckled grip revealed his tension. The young mother Cooper had noticed earlier quietly gathered her baby and diaper bag, slipping out through the side door while Shark was distracted by watching Sally. Cooper remained perfectly still in his corner booth, but his muscles tensed imperceptibly. He observed how Tank's right hand kept strained to his vest pocket, possibly concealing a weapon. Wrench had positioned himself where he could watch both the kitchen entrance and the main dining area, while Shark maintained his position by the door. The cafe's cheerful morning atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by a heavy tension that seemed to press down on everyone present. Even the sunlight streaming through the windows felt different now, casting harsh shadows across the bikers' faces and glinting off their various pieces of metal jewelry and chain accessories. Sally returned with menus and coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she set down the cups. Tank reached out and grabbed her wrist, not roughly yet, but with clear intent. "Why don't you stick around for a bit, darling? We might need some special attention with our order." Cooper watched as Sally's face paled, but she maintained her composure. Years of waitressing had taught her how to handle difficult customers, but these men were different. They weren't just looking for breakfast, they were looking for trouble. The situation was balanced on a knife's edge, and everyone in the cafe could feel it. The only question was, who would make the first move? Tank's grip on Sally's wrist tightened as she tried to pull away. The coffee pot in her other hand trembled, dark liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Around the cafe, the few remaining customers sat frozen, eyes down, pretending not to notice what was happening, all except Cooper, who hadn't moved but watched every detail with growing attention. "How about some eggs, boys?" Sally suggested, trying to keep her voice steady. Her attempt at normalcy felt out of place in the tense atmosphere. "Our cook makes the best omelettes in Vermont." Wrench, the bearded biker, laughed and deliberately knocked his coffee cup over. The hot liquid spread across the table and dripped onto the floor. "Oops," he said, showing yellow teeth in a mock smile. "Looks like we need more coffee and some napkins too." "And a new waitress," Shark added from his position near the door. "This one's too old for my taste." His words drew cruel chuckles from his companions. Sally's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. In her 40 years of waitressing, she dealt with all kinds of difficult customers, but the menace radiating from these men was different. It wasn't just rudeness. It was the promise of violence barely held in check. "I think you should leave," Sally said, finding a burst of courage. Her voice was quiet but firm, the voice of a woman who had raised 3 children on her own and wouldn't be bullied. "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." Tank's face darkened. His fingers squeezed harder, making Sally gasp in pain. "Maybe you didn't hear me clearly, sweetheart. We're not going anywhere until we're good and ready." He yanked her closer, causing her to stumble and spill coffee on her uniform. Old Joe's newspaper rustled as he lowered it slightly, his weathered face showing concern. The cook, Miguel, appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding his spatula like a weapon, but uncertainty clear in his eyes. Neither man moved to help. The Road Reaper's reputation for violence was well known in Burlington. "The food here better be worth the wait," Wrench said, standing up to tower over Sally. He reached out and tugged at her name tag. "Sally, is it?" Why don't you show us what kind of hospitality this place is famous for? Cooper noticed how Shark had shifted his stance, one hand now resting inside his vest. The movement suggested he was carrying, probably a small handgun or knife. Tank's free hand kept twitching toward his boot, another telling sign to Cooper's trained eye. Please, Sally whispered, trying one last time to free her wrist. You're hurting me. Tank pulled her even closer, his breath hot on her face. That's not hurting, darling. Not yet. But if you don't start showing us some proper respect. The coffee pot slipped from Sally's trembling hand, crashing to the floor. Hot coffee and broken glass scattered across the linoleum. The sound made everyone jump, and Tank's grip tightened reflexively, drawing a small cry of pain from Sally. Clean it up, Tank ordered, finally releasing her wrist. An angry red mark showed where his fingers had been. And bring us a fresh pot. Maybe if you're quick about it, we won't have to teach you a lesson about customer service. Sally knelt to pick up the broken pieces, her hands shaking. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. As she reached for a large piece of glass, Wrench deliberately kicked it away, sending it skittering under another table. Oops, he said again, earning more laughter from his friends. Better crawl under there and get it, Sally. We wouldn't want anyone to get hurt, would we? The humiliation was clear on Sally's face as she got down on her hands and knees. The remaining customers watched in helpless silence, shame and fear keeping them rooted to their seats. Even Miguel had retreated back into the kitchen, leaving Sally to face the bikers alone. But not everyone was paralyzed by fear. In his corner booth, Cooper had seen enough. His coffee cup made no sound as he set it down, his movements deliberate and controlled. The time for watching was over. Cooper stood up slowly, his movements so quiet that at first, only old Joe noticed. The retired postman's eyes widened slightly as he watched the soldier step away from his corner booth. Cooper's boots made no sound on the linoleum floor, a skill learned from years of combat operations where silence meant survival. Let her up, Cooper said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the unmistakable tone of command that had led men through firefights and ambushes. The cafe fell completely silent, even the kitchen's usual clatter stopping as Miguel peeked through the service window. Tank turned his head lazily, sizing up the man who dared to interrupt his fun. Cooper stood relaxed but balanced, his hands loose at his sides. To most people, he might have looked casual, but Sally, still on her knees, noticed how his feet were positioned, like a boxer ready to move in any direction. Well, look what we have here, Tank sneered, rising to his full height. He towered over Cooper by at least 4 inches, his massive frame casting a shadow across the floor. Looks like we got ourselves a hero. Wrench and Shark exchanged glances, their hands moving subtly toward hidden weapons. Cooper noticed every movement, cataloging threats just as he had done countless times in narrow Afghan streets. His face remained calm, almost expressionless, but his green eyes had taken on the sharp focus of a predator. I'm not trying to be a hero, Cooper replied evenly. I just think the lady should be allowed to stand up. His words were simple, but something in his tone made Tank's confident smirk falter slightly. Sally took advantage of the distraction to get back to her feet, clutching her serving tray like a shield. She backed away toward the counter, her earlier fear now mixed with curiosity about this quiet customer who had finally spoken up. This isn't your business, friend, Tank growled, taking a step toward Cooper. Why don't you sit back down, enjoy your coffee, and pretend you can't see anything, just like everyone else in this dump? Old Joe lowered his newspaper completely now, and the few remaining customers watched with a mixture of fear and hope. They had all wanted to help Sally, but none had found the courage. Now they held their breath, wondering if this stranger was about to make things much better, or much worse. I'd rather not sit down, Cooper said, his voice still calm. And I think it's time for you and your friends to leave. He hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made any aggressive gestures. But something had changed in the air of the cafe, like the pressure drop before a storm. Tank's face reddened with anger. Nobody talked to him this way, especially not in front of his crew. He took another step forward, now just arm's length from Cooper. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Yes, Cooper replied simply. I know exactly who I'm talking to. Just like I know your friend by the door has a weapon under his vest, and the one with the beard keeps reaching for something in his boot. His words caused both Wrench and Shark to stiffen in surprise. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Tank's face. This wasn't going according to plan. The stranger's confidence was unsettling. It wasn't bravado or false courage, but something else entirely, something dangerous. Last chance to walk away, Tank warned, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. Behind him, Wrench and Shark had started to spread out, instinctively moving to flank Cooper. Nobody wants trouble here. You're right, Cooper agreed, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Nobody wants trouble. That's why I'm giving you a chance to leave before things get complicated. Tank's expression twisted with rage. This supposed hero wasn't backing down, wasn't showing fear. Worse, he was making Tank look weak in front of his crew. There was only one way this could end now. Get him, Tank snarled, his massive fist already swinging toward Cooper's face. Tank's massive fist cut through the air where Cooper's head had been just a split second before. The soldier's movement was fluid, almost casual, as he shifted his weight slightly to the left. The punch missed entirely, throwing Tank off balance and causing him to stumble forward. Before Tank could recover, Cooper stepped to the side, his boot hooking behind Tank's leading foot. A gentle push on Tank's shoulder was all it took. The big man's own momentum sent him crashing into an empty table, scattering chairs across the floor. Knife! Sally screamed from behind the counter. Wrench had pulled a hunting knife from his boot, its serrated blade glinting in the morning sunlight. He lunged forward, slashing in a wide arc that would have opened Cooper's chest, if it had connected. But Cooper wasn't there anymore. He moved like water, flowing around the knife's path while simultaneously grabbing Wrench's wrist. His grip found pressure points that military trainers had drilled into him for years. Wrench's fingers opened involuntarily, the knife clattering to the floor. Shark reached into his vest, but Cooper had already anticipated this move. In one smooth motion, he twisted Wrench's arm behind his back and used him as a human shield. Shark hesitated, unable to draw his weapon without risking hitting his friend. I wouldn't, Cooper said calmly, applying slightly more pressure to Wrench's wrist. The biker let out a yelp of pain. Your friend's rotator cuff is about 3 pounds of pressure away from tearing. Tank was getting back to his feet, his face red with rage and embarrassment. You're dead, he growled, but there was a new note in his voice, uncertainty. This wasn't some random Good Samaritan. The way this man moved, the precision of his actions, spoke of years of training. No one has to get hurt here, Cooper said, his voice still steady. He kept Wrench positioned between himself and the other two bikers. Like I said before, you can still walk away. Shark finally managed to pull his weapon, a small .38 revolver. Old Joe ducked under his table, and Sally gasped. McGill disappeared from the kitchen window with a clatter of pans. Cooper's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Drawing a gun in a public place, he said, almost conversationally. That's a felony. Add that to assault, criminal threatening, and carrying a concealed weapon without a permit. You're looking at serious time. Shut up. Shark's hand was shaking slightly, the gun wavering. Let him go, or I'll shoot. No, you won't, Cooper replied. His grip shifted slightly on Wrench's arm, causing another yelp of pain. Because right now, you're only facing state charges. The moment you pull that trigger, it becomes federal. And trust me, federal time is a lot harder. Tank had regained his feet, but he stayed where he was, watching Cooper with growing realization. The way the stranger handled himself, his knowledge of the law, his absolute control of the situation, it all added up to something Tank had seen before. You're military, Tank said, his voice rough. Special forces? Cooper didn't reply, but his silence was answer enough. Instead, he applied another ounce of pressure to Wrench's arm. Tell your friend to put the gun down, he said quietly. Before this becomes something none of us can walk away from. Wrench didn't wait for Tank's order. Put it down, Shark. Put it down. This guy's gonna break my arm. He won't break it, Cooper corrected calmly. But the torn ligaments will take about 6 months to heal. 4 with good physical therapy. The Café was silent except for Wrench's heavy breathing. Shark's hand trembled more violently now, sweat visible on his forehead. Tank stood perfectly still, his earlier bravado replaced by genuine fear. Last chance? Cooper said softly. The police are probably already on their way. Someone must have called them by now. The smart play is to put the gun down and leave. Now. The moment stretched like a wire about to snap. Everything hung on what would happen in the next few seconds. And everyone in the cafe knew it. The sound of approaching police sirens cut through the tense silence of Mel's cafe. Shark's eyes darted to the window, his gun hand trembling more noticeably now. Outside, the red and blue lights began to reflect off the chrome of their parked motorcycles. "Time's up," Cooper said quietly. "What's it going to be?" His grip on wrench hadn't changed, maintaining the exact pressure needed. Not enough to cause permanent damage, but enough to keep the biker immobilized and in considerable discomfort. Tank looked at the approaching police cars, then back at Cooper. The realization slowly dawned on his face that this situation had spiraled far beyond his control. "Put it down, Shark," he ordered, his voice hoarse. "Put it down now." Shark hesitated for a moment longer, sweat running down his face. Then, slowly, he lowered the revolver and placed it on the nearest table. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. "Kick it away from you," Cooper instructed. Shark complied, sending the weapon sliding across the floor until it stopped near old Joe's table. The retired postman quickly picked it up with a napkin, careful not to leave fingerprints. 2 police cars pulled into the parking lot, their sirens cutting off but lights still flashing. Officer Sarah Martinez, a veteran of Burlington's police force, was the first through the door, her weapon drawn. Behind her, Officer Tom Reynolds entered from the side entrance, creating a tactical crossfire position. "Everyone freeze," Martinez commanded, her eyes quickly assessing the scene. "Hands where I can see them." The guy with the shaved head and his friend by the window were harassing customers. Cooper reported calmly, still maintaining his hold on wrench. The one by the window pulled a firearm. "Mr. Johnson has it secured with a napkin on his table." This one, he adjusted his grip slightly, making wrench wince, pulled a knife. "It's on the floor by the overturned chair." Martinez's eyebrows rose slightly at the professional nature of the report. "You military?" she asked, moving to secure Tank while Reynolds covered Shark. "Yes, ma'am." Staff Sergeant James Cooper, 5th Special Forces Group. His identification was smooth, practiced. "I have ID in my back pocket if you'd like to verify." "Let's get these 3 secured first," Martinez replied, already handcuffing Tank. "Then we can sort out the details." The next few minutes were a blur of efficient police activity. Reynolds secured Shark while Martinez raided Tank his rights. A 3rd officer arrived to help with wrench, allowing Cooper to finally release his hold. The biker immediately grabbed his shoulder, cursing under his breath. Sally emerged from behind the counter, still shaking slightly but holding herself together. "I want to press charges," she said firmly. "They threatened me, grabbed me, and destroyed property." She held up her wrist, showing the bruises that were already forming from Tank's grip. "We'll take your statement, ma'am," Martinez assured her while bagging the knife as evidence. Old Joe and the other customers who had witnessed everything lined up to give their accounts as well. Cooper stood back, watching as the 3 bikers were led out to the waiting patrol cars. Their swagger was gone now, replaced by the slumped shoulders of men realizing just how badly they had miscalculated their morning. "Sergeant Cooper." Officer Reynolds approached with a notepad. "We'll need your statement too. And I have to say, sir, that was some impressive work. Clean, controlled, no unnecessary force. You military guys usually do it by the book." Cooper nodded modestly. "Just did what needed to be done, officer. Nothing more." He glanced at Sally, who was showing her bruised wrist to a paramedic who had arrived on scene. No one should have to put up with that kind of behavior in their workplace. The morning sun now streamed fully through the cafe windows, illuminating the scattered chairs and spilled coffee. Miguel had emerged from the kitchen and was already starting to clean up, while old Joe helped right the overturned table. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 5 minutes, but its resolution would have lasting effects on both the cafe and its regular customers. Sometimes, Cooper reflected, the most important battles weren't fought on foreign soil, but in small diners on quiet morning streets. An hour after the incident, Mel's Café had mostly returned to its normal state. The overturned furniture was back in place, the spilled coffee cleaned up, and most of the police had left with their reports completed. Only Officer Martinez remained, finishing up some paperwork at the counter while sipping the fresh coffee Sally had insisted on providing to everyone. Cooper sat in his usual corner booth, now joined by Sally and old Joe. The morning sunlight highlighted the tired lines on Sally's face, but her eyes sparkled with renewed energy as she shared stories about her 40 years of waitressing. "Never had anything like this happen before," she said, absently rubbing her bruised wrist. "Well, except for that time in '92 when someone tried to rob us with a plastic spoon." She chuckled, her natural good humor already returning. Old Joe folded his newspaper neatly, finally ready to discuss what he witnessed. "You know, son," he said to Cooper, "I've been coming to this cafe for 30 years. Seen all sorts of folks come and go, but I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that. Where'd you learn to move like that?" Cooper took a sip of his fresh coffee before answering. "Fort Bragg, mainly. Special Forces training teaches you to end conflicts quickly and with minimal force. The goal is always to control the situation, not escalate it." Officer Martinez approached their table, tucking her notebook into her pocket. "Well, Sergeant Cooper, looks like we got everything we need. The DA's office is already talking about pressing federal charges because of the firearm. Those three won't be bothering anyone for quite a while." "Thank you, officer," Cooper replied quietly. "Will you need me to testify?" "Most likely, yes, but given their records and the number of witnesses, they'll probably take a plea deal." She handed Cooper her card. "We'll be in touch. And thank you. Burlington's a small town. We don't need people like that thinking they can push folks around." As Martinez left, Miguel emerged from the kitchen carrying a large plate. "On the house," he announced, placing a fresh breakfast in front of Cooper. The eggs were perfectly cooked, the bacon crispy, and the hash browns golden brown. "My cousin was Special Forces too. Served in Iraq. You people, you do more than most folks know." The cafe's regular customers had started returning, word having spread quickly through the small town about what had happened. Each person who came in seemed to find a reason to stop by Cooper's table, to shake his hand, to offer thanks, or just to get a closer look at the quiet soldier who had stood up to the road reapers. Sally's daughter Jenny rushed in, having heard about the incident at the grocery store where she worked. "Mom, are you okay?" She hugged her mother tightly, then turned to Cooper with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for protecting her. I don't know what I would have." "It's what anyone would have done," Cooper replied, uncomfortable with the attention, but old Joe shook his head. "No, son, it's what anyone should have done. You're the one who actually did it." The old man's voice carried the weight of wisdom earned over many years. "That's what makes the difference." The local newspaper reporter, Amy Chen, arrived with her camera, eager to write a story about the incident. But Cooper politely declined to be photographed or interviewed. "The story isn't about me," he explained. "It's about a community standing up to bullies. That's all." As the morning wore on, Cooper noticed something changing in the cafe's atmosphere. People were holding their heads a little higher, talking a little louder, laughing more freely. It wasn't just relief from the incident being over. It was pride. Pride in their town, in their local cafe, in knowing that sometimes the good guys really did win. Sally brought Cooper yet another cup of coffee, this one accompanied by a slice of her famous apple pie. "You know," she said with a warm smile, "that corner booth is yours for as long as you want it. Every morning, just like today." Cooper looked around the cafe, at old Joe reading his paper, at Miguel singing in Spanish as he cooked, at Jenny helping her mother serve customers, at the sunlight streaming through windows now free of fear and tension. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, he felt something he had been missing, a sense of belonging. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at Mel's Café. The early morning sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold as Cooper walked toward his regular corner booth. The bell above the door chimed softly, and Sally looked up from behind the counter with a warm smile that had become part of his daily routine. "Morning, James," she called out, already reaching for the coffee pot. She had started using his first name a week ago, deciding that anyone who had protected her cafe family had earned the right to be addressed as such. The bruises on her wrist had faded, but the gratitude in her eyes remained as bright as ever. The cafe had changed in subtle but significant ways. New security cameras had been installed, with small red lights blinking quietly in the corners. The side entrance now had a proper lock instead of the old sliding bolt, and the local police had made it part of their regular patrol route to drive by during the morning rush. But the most noticeable changes were in the people themselves. Old Joe had moved his usual seat to face the door, not out of fear, but with a newfound sense of watchfulness over his favorite breakfast spot. Miguel had taken to leaving the kitchen door open, keeping an eye on the dining area while he cooked. And Sally carried herself with renewed confidence, no longer tensing up when the motorcycle sounds echoed from the street outside. "Your usual, dear?" Sally asked, setting down a steaming cup of coffee. Before Cooper could answer, the bell chimed again. A group of 4 men entered, their military bearing immediately obvious to Cooper's trained eye. They were veterans from the local VFW post, and over the past weeks, more and more of them had started making Mel's their morning gathering place. "Morning, Sarge," one of them called out. Cooper nodded in greeting. Word had spread through the veteran community about what had happened, and they had gradually claimed the cafe as their own informal meeting spot. They didn't make a show of it. There were no loud conversations about war stories or dramatic displays of military brotherhood. Instead, they simply came, enjoyed their breakfast, and provided a quiet, reassuring presence that both the staff and regular customers had come to appreciate. The Road Reapers hadn't been seen in Burlington since the incident. The local news had reported that their clubhouse outside town had been shut down after police discovered various illegal activities during their investigation. Tank and his crew were facing multiple charges, their court date set for next month. Cooper had already received his subpoena to testify, though Officer Martinez's prediction about a plea deal seemed increasingly likely. Sally brought over his usual breakfast, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, and hash browns. "Jenny's starting college next week," she mentioned proudly. "She's taking criminal justice courses. Says she wants to help people like you did." Cooper smiled at this unexpected ripple effect of that morning's events. Miguel's young son, Carlos, was wiping down tables nearby. The 12-year-old had started helping out at the cafe on weekends, earning pocket money and learning the family business. But Cooper had noticed how the boy practiced standing straight, keeping his eyes on the door, trying to mimic the quiet alertness he saw in the veteran customers. "You know," Sally said, sliding into the booth across from Cooper for her morning break, "business is actually better than ever. Folks say they feel safe here. Like it's not just a cafe anymore, it's a community." Cooper understood what she meant. In the military, they called it a safe zone, a place where people could let their guard down, knowing that others were watching out for them. Mel's had become that kind of place, not through force or fear, but through the simple act of people standing together against those who would disturb their peace. The morning sun continued to rise, warming the cafe's large windows. Regular customers came and went, exchanging greetings and sharing stories over coffee and breakfast. Officer Martinez stopped by for her usual morning coffee, now taking it at the counter instead of in her patrol car. The veterans in the corner discussed plans for the upcoming Veterans Day parade, while Old Joe helped Carlos learn to fold the napkins just right. And in his corner booth, Cooper sipped his coffee and watched it all with quiet satisfaction. He had found more than just a breakfast spot, he had found a home. Sometimes, he reflected, the biggest battles we win aren't fought with fists or weapons, but with the simple courage to stand up for what's right and the wisdom to stay and protect what we've won.